Across Ukraine, civilians are seeking refuge in basements and subway stations, and families are separated. Few expected it would come to this. But since the Russian invasion began, at least several hundred people have been killed, and the UN estimates up to 4 million could flee the country. Ukrainians are having to make agonizing choices. Some are arming themselves and making Molotov cocktails, while others flee. In one video shared widely online, a father says goodbye to his daughter. Before putting her on a bus to take her away from the fighting, he stays behind. Loading. In the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, Olga Polotska has been listening for air raid sirens and moving her family to shelter when Russian missiles are fired at targets in the city. She told the ABC News Daily podcast she was afraid for the future of her country. Podcast ABC News Daily Shell-Shocked Russia's Invasion of Ukraine begins. ABC News Daily is a new podcast to help you understand your world in under 15 minutes. About subscribe. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Listen more great ABC podcasts. I understand that I have already given birth to my kids, and actually I have done my duty for them, and I am not very afraid for myself, she said. I feel anger and frustration because for many years the country has been trying to build up and just become a part of the European community. People started coming to Ukraine, tourists. We started developing many things. We started reforming many things, and that went quite fast. The country has changed. This is going to be the end of everything. She said even though she believed many Ukrainians were willing to fight against Russian forces, it wouldn't stop the invaders from decimating what has been achieved in the country. The enemy is too powerful, and they can easily destroy everything, and they will not stop. While the world sat at the negotiating table, Putin made his move. It began while the UN Security Council met to try and avert a Russian invasion of Ukraine, at a meeting in New York on Wednesday night local time. As the UN Security Council met, Russia invaded Ukraine. AP, Emilio Morinati. UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres had opened the last-ditch meeting with a plea to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Give peace a chance, he said. But that plea fell on deaf ears. As the delegates spoke in New York, over in Moscow, Mr. Putin went on television and declared Russia would begin a special military operation in Ukraine. His reason for attacking. The Russian president said he could not allow the US-aligned NATO alliance to move any closer east and claimed he wanted to demilitarize Ukraine. Soon after, in the early hours of Thursday morning, airstrikes began in Ukrainian cities from Kharkiv in the east to Kiev in central Ukraine, and even near Lviv in the west. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 35 seconds. 35s Ukraine's UN representative told his Russian counterpart, war criminals go straight to hell. For several minutes, the delegates in the Security Council seemed unaware that a Russian invasion had begun, until the US ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, told the meeting what had happened. Unfortunately, while we've been meeting in the Security Council tonight, it appears that President Putin has ordered that last step, she said. This is a grave emergency. The meeting, unable to prevent the war from starting, ended with a blunt warning from the Ukrainian ambassador to the Russian ambassador. There is no purgatory for war criminals, said Ukraine's Sergei Kislitsya. They go straight to hell, ambassador. Russian forces made a bold move, but have been slowed down. The Russian advance surprised many international observers. Most had predicted Mr. Putin might try a limited invasion, targeting the Donbass region in the east, where it has long backed the separatist republics in Luhansk and Donetsk, both of which it officially recognized earlier in the week. Instead, within hours of Mr. Putin's speech on Thursday morning, troops were entering Ukraine from the east, north and south. Known Russian incursions in Ukraine. ABC News. From the north, Russian forces crossed the border from Belarus, moving towards the capital of Kiev, and captured the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster on their way. In the south, amphibious assaults were launched on the port cities of Odessa and Mariupol, while forces crossed overland from Russian-held Crimea and attempted to take the city of Kherson. And in the east, Russian troops moved on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, and separatist forces in Donetsk and Luhansk joined with Russian troops to push forward into the Donbas region. A damaged residential building in Kiev, after Russia launched a massive military operation against Ukraine. Meet Bektas. But if the ambition of Russia's invasion was a surprise, so was the amount of resistance from Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian army initially repelled an airborne assault on the country's largest airport, at Hostomel, and pushed Russian troops back at the city of Kherson. Mr. Putin had asked the Ukrainian army to lay down their arms or turn on the Ukrainian government, but neither appear likely. Russian forces met more resistance than expected, according to both the British Ministry of Defense and US government officials. Their assessment is that the invasion is taking longer to achieve its goals than Russian leadership had planned for. What has become clear, however, is that Russia's main target is the capital of Kiev, and Russian forces continued to push into the city overnight. On Saturday, Russian troops tried to force their way down Peremohai Avenue into the heart of the city. Heavy fighting and explosions were reported in the area, and by daybreak the Ukrainian government claimed it had pushed back Russian forces. US and UK defense officials said Russian forces were roughly 30 kilometers outside Kiev, and that an unspecified number of Russian military sabotage groups had entered the capital. Smoke and flames could be seen near Peremohai Avenue, the reported site of a street battle in Kiev. Gleb Garanich. Ukrainian president says he is Russia's #1 target. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an address as Russian forces moved towards the capital and promised to stay in Kiev and fight. "The enemy has marked me down as the #1 target," he said. "My family is the #2 target. They want to destroy Ukraine politically by destroying the head of state." The president shared videos proving to Ukrainians he remained in the capital, along with other national leaders, even as Russian forces began entering the suburbs to the north of the city. Loading. Mr. Zelensky had earlier mobilized 200,000 army reservists and banned able-bodied men between 18 to 60 from leaving the country, urging them to join the fight instead of leaving. In Kiev, local authorities distributed instructions to residents on how to make their own Molotov cocktails to use against Russian troops. Ordinary Ukrainians are being armed to form territorial defense forces. Mikhail Palanchak. The mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, a former world heavyweight champion boxer, and his brother Vladimir, also a former world heavyweight champion, both said they would take up arms themselves to defend the city. As Russian casualties mount and fighting drags on without a swift outright victory, it might be Mr. Putin who finds himself in the hot seat. Vladimir Klitschko, who joined the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces, and his brother, mayor of Kiev, and former heavyweight boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko. Gleb Garanich. Western allies attempt to turn up pressure on Putin. As the Ukrainian president pleaded for tougher measures against Russia, Western allies tried to pressure Mr. Putin and Russia's leadership. A tougher round of sanctions were announced by the United States, UK, Australia and other allies, targeting members of Russia's ruling class. President Joe Biden speaks about the Russian invasion of Ukraine in the East Room of the White House, Thursday, February 24, 2022, in Washington. AP, Alex Brandon. However, they were short of what the Ukrainian government asked for, which would have meant shutting Russia out of the international system for financial transactions, known as SWIFT. President Joe Biden promised his measures, which also barred top Russian banks from making transactions in US dollars, would have an even more crippling effect. But he conceded barring Russia from SWIFT was not possible without widespread support. "Right now, that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take," said President Biden. However, by the weekend, European countries like Germany said they would consider barring Russia from SWIFT. Russians grapple with news of the invasion. In Russia,